Hey, it's Jordan. I'm here with Frank. You were with your UAW, and you've worked at the Warren factory. You worked there for 20 years, and you're trying to kind of spearhead basically a response here to what General Motors is doing. I believe Warren is one of the largest layoffs happening of all the plants. So, can you kind of talk about part of this event tonight? Was kind of talking about making the union fight an international one, because this is an international company, and I guess the unions have been operating more in a domestic footprint. What needs to be done to stop what they're doing now, but also to stop making concessions for another couple of decades?
So, when are you going to ask me a hard question? So, certainly the track that we're on now is not going to stop these plants from closing. The track that we are pursuing is, on the one hand, we've got to think about the larger crisis that we're confronted with, which is the climate crisis. And we have to look at these situations that we're facing now as an opportunity to begin to do a rapid conversion for what they call a green economy, but to get away from fossil fuels. And the notion that General Motors can say we're for zero emissions, but yet they're gravitating more and more to producing the trucks and the SUVs is an absolutely non-starter. It's a non-starter. So we're elevating the discussion about we need to use these plants not to make trucks, or if we're going to make trucks, let's make electric ones.
And it seems to me, some people here were talking about we need to stop spending money on the cars and on things like that, which in the short term would hurt General Motors, but kind of give some leverage. If workers and community members stop buying their products, they wouldn't have all the leverage in contract negotiations and things like that. Well, do you want to see just if it could be organized? It's very hard in labor to organize anything these days. Citywide strike, nationwide strike. People stop buying GM products. What do you think needs to be done?
So, we're also in the middle of what may be another government shutdown.
Yeah.
And
this week, actually.
The 15th.
Yeah.
And what I thought was really exciting is that the woman who heads up the flight attendants union has already called for a general strike in the event that there's another government shutdown. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of weaving together different working class struggles. We have a plant closure we're faced with. They're faced with a government shutdown. It seems to me that that's going to generate momentum. They don't, when Trump does all this stuff, the ruling class has got to be really worried about what he's triggering as a backlash. Yeah. And I think that seeing this woman, the head of the flight attendants union, calling for a general strike is like, that's new vocabulary. We haven't heard that kind of vocabulary in a while. And I'm very heartened by the fact that it's happening. And it may be that we should be talking about, well, we got a problem here too. Why don't we shut it down, right? So that's one piece. Another piece is that there is this movement for a Green New Deal. And I think that the more we accelerate that, the more we can put pressure on the government, of course, and on the companies. And the third thing that we've been advocating is the internationalism. And so if there's ways that we can try to coordinate with the GM workers in Brazil or the GM workers in Germany, wherever we are, we're in Mexico, if we can coordinate some kind of concerted activity to represent that we're not alone, that might be another step that we can take. Do I think that we can close the plants or strike them all now? No, the UAW is nowhere near prepared to do that. But holding events like this is sort of to illuminate for members that might otherwise not know. There is another way that's possible, and it has something to do with the way the Flint sit-down happened in the 30s.
And what do you say to people who criticize the union that the union's been bending over for GM for years and years and years, and too many concessions, and essentially having no spine? Obviously, they were coming in very heavy-handed like they're doing now. But what about union leadership? I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but there is criticisms.
So the fundamental problem is this. We have a globalized corporation that we're dealing with. But the union movement has kept its blinders on like this and therefore confined our struggles. And now is elevating the struggle. Oh, we got to fight against the Mexicans because they're taking our work. It's a wrong direction. It's a wrong direction. And so the UAW didn't go in the direction of internationalism, because had we done that, and I'm talking about years ago, we may be in a stronger position to deal with General Motors than we are now. So now it's kind of like if you take 3 steps in the direction of acquiescing, it's a lot easier on the 4th step to acquiesce. And by the way, one other point. Nobody's talking about the UAW's inability to organize the unorganized auto workers in the rest of the country. Half the workforce in auto today is non-union. There has to be a fundamental questioning of why has the UAW since the early 80s been failing one plant after another to organize, and there's never been a self-examination that says we're doing something wrong. We've got to figure out another course, and that's something that's been lacking and never happened. For example, at a UAW convention, that people say we got to figure out another course.
Let me ask you, so psychologically, if in 2009 the federal government felt such an urgency, we have to bail out GM, Chrysler, Ford, or you're going to lose, thousands and thousands of jobs, where is that urgency now when the same jobs they were worried about losing in 2009, so they gave GM $51 billion so that people wouldn't lose their jobs? Where is that urgency now that GM is laying off, what is it, 10 to 15% of its workforce?
Right.
Yeah. Where is that urgency? The company's getting a bailout, but not the people.
Right. So let me point out. So out of that $51 billion that you referred to, keep in mind that the federal government actually paid out $11 billion. The rest of it was paid back. But nevertheless, GM is out. The government is out like $11 billion. Mm-hmm. My take on the bailout of 2009 was that was a manufactured crisis coming out of Wall Street. And that was used, I don't know if you're familiar with Naomi Klein's work, mm-hmm. but she talks about
shock doctrine.
Right. That was the most profound example of shock doctrine, and that immediate, that close to me. Where they used that crisis to get the UAW to make concessions that otherwise the company was unable to achieve, because the leadership of the UAW said, I can't take that back to the membership. They will never accept it. And I saw that. I was on staff. I saw the company demanding these things, and I saw the UAW responding, we can't do it. We can't. There's no way we can do it and politically survive. So they figured out how to do it. We're going to have a financial crisis, and during that financial crisis, we'll get away with all kinds of things that we otherwise could never have done.
So you think Wall Street forced the financial crisis for things like that?
I think that the companies were prepared in the event of that financial crisis. They were prepared to make their move and say, okay, now's the time that we can shave the UAW. And I want to tell you, so in the 2010 convention, none other than Jennifer Granholm, the governor of the state of Michigan, at the UAW convention, first day, all the bigwigs up on the front stage, all the delegates out in the audience, she comes and says, the UAW is no longer going to be a union that's going to fight against management. You are now going to be a union that provides superior labor. It redefined the UAW coming out of that bankruptcy. And by God, they took their marching orders, and that's what they've done ever since.
So Granholm basically said, shut up.
Absolutely. And they all sat there and said, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you bigger picture because, like you said, UAW is not going to be able to, in the short term, stop these plant closures. So the ripple down effect, I think, people are very disconnected when you live in New York and D.C. and L.A. Most of the media is in New York and D.C., so they don't understand how somebody like Donald Trump could become president. Well, when you have plant after plant after plant after plant closing, not just in cars, but in steel and this and that, you have economically desperate, hopeless, angry people, and then you see a showman. I'm going to take it to, I'm going to take it to Goldman Sachs, and I'm going to bring the factories back.
Drain the swamp.
I'm going to drain the swamp.
Right.
So,
Right.
Isn't exactly what's happening now why phony populists are able to rise? Because they're preying on sincere economic pain and fear. And it's not just the workers. I mean, small businesses are going to be, small business get affected. The schools, I mean, local everything.
So,
I'm not defending Donald Trump. My point is...
No, I totally get what you're saying. I think that workers hear a lot of rhetoric. A lot of rhetoric that comes from their friends in the Democratic Party. And year after year after year, they hear this rhetoric. Now, I want to be mindful that a lot of UAW members who may have supported Trump in 2016 were supporters of Barack Obama, not once but twice. It's very important to point that out. And I know some friends who were Obama supporters who then said, screw this, I'm going with Trump.
And we're supportive of Bernie on the Democratic side.
So in the state of Michigan, Bernie Sanders won the primary. He beat Clinton.